Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Tim Lohse, who's a partner at Manatt. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, Tim, you have one of the more unusual backgrounds I come across. I see you were an electrical engineer, as was I. Tell me what made you decide to choose that major in the first place.
Sure. And so my dad was actually a rocket scientist at Lockheed and was doing
Oh.
launch systems for satellites and things. So it sort of got me into it a little bit. And then my interest has always been sort of in math and science and stuff. So it's sort of a natural progression.
What was your career goals at the time you started college? What were you thinking you were going to do?
So yeah, and that didn't quite work out for me very well. Um, so the thing that really got me interested was VLSI chip design, so the
Uh-huh.
layouts of chip designs, and Tufts had a program for that, and I actually was doing that and went to the lab and actually laid out a chip, all that good stuff. But then discovered that in most companies there's one or two very senior people who do that and no one else, and so the chances of me sort of getting into that space was sort of really limited.
Oh,
So that
interesting.
so but that's kind of what got me into it. I really enjoyed so digital logic more than analog. Um but
I can relate.
yeah, well, I took a communications class and I'm like, okay, I can't figure this stuff out. This is not good. But on the other hand, I loved semiconductor physics and sources and drains and channels being formed and all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
So um, which is why I got into that, which is sort of analog, but
Yeah,
not really.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, let's see. You're about my age. What VLSI was just kind of getting going in the late 80s, right? That it wasn't it pretty new at that point?
uh, relatively new, yeah.
Yeah.
But it had still been, I mean, it had been going on since the 70s in some level, but
Okay.
quite as um, not quite as institutionalized, I guess I would
Yeah,
say. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's about the time you got people like TSMC or United Micro Electronics doing sort of um, the big semiconductor developments.
Hmm. Did you do any kind of senior thesis or research or anything like that as an undergrad, or no?
No, did not spend a lot of time, as I said, doing the VLSI chip design stuff. The other interesting thing that would kind of go in that direction would be as part of a digital logic class,
Hmm.
we actually developed the the rear tail lights for a Thunderbird,
Okay.
um, which was which was designed for, you had to, if you turned right, the lights would go on in sequence and vice versa.
Yeah.
But on top of that, if you hit the brake, then obviously it'd all have to go on at the same time. And so there was logic in terms of making that all work out, which was quite interesting, actually. It was more complicated than you might think.
Well, you can relate to this. My senior, I was a double E and we graduated in the same year. So I had to program a Intel 8088, which I'm sure you remember in
Yep.
assembly language. And it was a nightmare.
Yes. I used to really enjoy assembly language. But the problem was that it was so it was such a low level that
Yeah.
it took forever to program anything. But it was
Totally.
really interesting thinking about, well, I need this piece of data in this register. I need to move this register. I need to add these registers and all that other sort of stuff that people, today, everything's abstracted so much that people don't ever think about what's
Yeah.
really going on at
Yeah.
sort of the
Yeah.
processor
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. To say nothing of debugging it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Did you take a lot of computer programming as a double E, or because a lot of double E's also take a fair amount of computer programming? Did you do that or not much?
I did. Tufts had the first course you had to take at some point was data structures,
Hmm.
and took it a few times and just never got through it because so my entire Tufts career I was rowing crew,
Oh, interesting.
which was a very intense sport that basically meant every morning I was up at 5 a.m. I'd row for
Yeah.
2 hours and come back. And so the trying to do a really complicated computer programming course at the time was difficult, and this is back when you still had to go into the computer lab and
Of
log
course.
on to a terminal and stuff, so it was kind of a little awkward. But the project that kept causing me to go, yeah, I'd love to do this, but not going to work, is a Turing machine
Uh-huh.
where the data stream is a bunch of packages going to different floors in the building, and you were to design the software, the code that would then automate that process and get all the packages to the correct floor as quickly as possible, blah blah blah.
Huh.
So and the way the professor judged your project is based on how quickly you were relative to his
Wow.
implementation of the idea. So
Huh.
um, yeah, so yeah, I mean, and I've continued to do computer programming here and there, but it,
It must have been really hard doing double E and rowing because most double E's I know, they stay up all night working on problem sets and programming, as did I. And then I don't see how you can possibly get up at 5 in the morning unless you just stayed awake and went straight to rowing.
more or less that's kind of what that's kind of what you do. And I don't know about your education, but Tufts, the first year was very lab intensive, so there were 4 classes and there was a lab for each of them that you had to do, and rowing, so that made
Yeah.
it even more complicated. Yeah,
Huh.
it was interesting.
I'm guessing between being a double E and rowing, you probably didn't have a lot of time for social stuff.
Yeah, it kept me out of trouble.
Well, tell me how you made the switch to law. I assume that's gonna come. That story's gonna reveal itself. But tell me what made you decide to do that then?
Sure. So I graduated from Tufts. I was kind of looking around for a job, and Boston is very much a defense industry. There's
Mhm.
MITRE and Raytheon and various other companies. And so I was out interviewing with people, and they're like, "Hey, you're great, but we're not hiring right now." It was kind of when the defense industry was down. And my my mom's friend was a chief patent attorney at Park Xerox out here,
Oh,
and
interesting.
knew a firm in DC that was looking for someone to do some work for them. And so I hopped on the train and went down to DC and interviewed with them, and they offered me a job. I'm like, well, okay, it's
Interesting.
interesting, yeah. And the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it, the more I found
Huh.
the interplay between the engineering and then also the law, and how those two intersect together.
Yeah.
Um, and it's sort of the same thing where you get the intersection between the law and business, so
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
you become a little more of an advisor versus just a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think is something that really actually suits me now at Manatt, because Manatt has a very similar type of philosophy of trying to be more an advisor than being a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So
So
yeah,
that first job in DC, that was before you went to law school.
correct.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. And so then did you, obviously you're a patent litigator, but did you do some prosecution? And how did you figure out you wanted to be a litigator? Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So it was kind of, I worked for a summer at a patent boutique that doesn't exist anymore, and then I actually responded to an ad for Great Carrier that they were actually looking for a licensing person.
Uh-huh.
It said IP attorney. I thought, oh, patent attorney. Well, I've come to discover what IP attorney generally means is not patent attorney.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so I applied, and I ended up doing probably 3, 4, 5, 6 years of just prosecution, pure prosecution,
Uh-huh.
helping to get patents in the tech industry, which was fun. It was a lot of fun. And then at some point, one of our litigators, who was more of a commercial litigator,
Uh-huh.
decided he wanted to do patent stuff. And he's like, I need someone to help me with this. Hey, Tim, why don't you do it? I'm like, okay, I will do patent work, do patent litigation work. So that's how I got into it. So I was more
Hmm.
prosecution for a long while and then did patent litigation.
Uh-huh. And did you
Um,
like patent litigation instantly, or what did you think?
yeah, I did. I mean, I liked aspects of it, I guess I would say. I to this day, I still like aspects of it.
Uh-huh.
The figuring out what the patent is and what it is not is very interesting, obviously. But at some point, patent litigation becomes like any other litigation. There's
Yeah.
lots of discovery. There's lots of protective order issues that are just not terribly interesting.
Yeah,
So
right. So
yeah.
what is your practice mix now? Do you still do some prosecution or you're almost all litigation now?
Nope. same mix,
Uh-huh.
lots of prosecution, little litigation, and also do some sort of corporate diligence type work as
Yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah,
trying to figure
yeah,
that stuff out. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What do you find your double E degree comes in handy with your clients? Do they notice that you have a technical degree? Does that come up at all?
I, they don't ever talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know, but I do know there are various occasions where it's definitely something because of that. I'm aware of things that they may not otherwise realize I understand. And so I've had conversations with inventors where I'm like, well, so hold on a minute. It seems to me your invention's great, but what about this? Why not this?
Uh-huh,
Which
uh-huh.
is something you'd learn from engineering, and that has helped sort of broaden the scope of the patent. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah.
I totally get that. Oh, so what's the hardest technology you've had to grapple with as a patent lawyer?
Now, obviously, AI and machine learning that I'm doing now is definitely complicated because sometimes it gets a little fuzzy.
What does your dad think about the fact that you became a patent lawyer instead of an engineer?
Uh, it's funny when I first mentioned to him, he's like, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I knew a couple of patent attorneys at Lockheed. Never thought I wanted to do that, but hey, that was about as far as it got. So, um, it you know, it 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 is a fascinating thing. I mean, and so when I was working at the firm, my first firm I worked at in DC, I was doing my work, and one of the partners came in and said, "Tim, we really need your help on this thing." Okay, here's a huge 2 foot by 4 foot processor board for a copier networking, and we want you to look at it and write a patent on it. Okay, so I'm looking at it, going through it. I realized that actually the circuit didn't work,
Hmm.
and we went up and talked with the engineer, and he looks, he goes, hey, you're right. It doesn't work. Let me fix it. And he fixed it, and off he went. So once again, something I probably would not have necessarily been able to do, but
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
background and
yeah, yeah.
understanding how it works. So
So overall, you pleased with your career decision? I realize it was a little bit accidental, but are you happy with it?
yeah, it's really been interesting. It's a really cool mix of the law and the technology without being too deep into either of them, I suppose. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate your taking time. It was a fascinating conversation. I love hearing about fellow engineers who became lawyers, and your story was truly interesting. So I appreciate your taking the time.
Sure. Thank you.
This is Richard Hsu and Tim Lohse. Thanks.